Thank you very much. He was a great host. I came in here, I had a bowl of Cheerios at 5 o'clock this morning, East Coast time, and it had worn off. And so I came in here and I told him he said he was going to do the introduction, and I said, you know, I'm probably going to die before the introduction. And it's always embarrassing for somebody to introduce somebody who's just died for lack of food. So Mishka was good enough to, he rounded up what you all had for lunch apparently. And it was good. I'm not going to die, at least not of that particular cause. I may die in your hands later, I don't know. It's really nice to be here, and I would like to, can all of you in the back hear okay? And the screen is relatively small from where you sit back there. If you want to move up here, that's fine with me. There's a lot of space up here. Bring a chair and come on up. You won't crowd me. So if you want to see things, now if you don't want to see and don't want to hear, don't worry about it. But if you do want to see it, you may want to get closer. I'm going to talk for about maybe 45 minutes and open the floor to questions. And I want to describe what has been roughly the last 2.5 years of my life professionally, and it involves climate change. And if this was a kind of an airplane journey, a 35,000-foot view of things is the meditation that is called Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Collapse. Will be out this summer, probably in July. And that is simply, it is what it purports to be. It's simply a meditation of what it means to live at this particular time, when we're radically altering the fundamental conditions of life on the planet. And how do we think about that? And we're not totally adept at thinking about things that big with that much scale, scope, and duration. The roughly 15,000-foot view has been done in the last 2.5 years. The group has got together, about 150 got together, and at my instigation and the foundation I work for on the side helped to fund what's called the President's Climate Action Plan. That's the thing on the left here, the cover sheet for it. I'll show you a slide later. You can go to the website and download the documents here. This was an intent to pull together the best climate people in the United States, both science people and policy people, to develop an action plan for the first 100 days of the next U.S. administration, since there had been no action by the previous administration. So we set about to do that. It was about a $2.2 billion project, and we pulled together what I think is an extraordinary document that became, we were told, the gold standard for climate policy thinking in the States relative to the first period of 100 days of administration. I want to talk a little bit about that. For those of you who are, how many teachers do I have here? Let's see your hands. For those of you who are teachers, and all of you are engaged in education in some fashion or other, this is extraordinary because I began to think of ourselves on this particular project, what we call the PCAP, the President's Climate Action Project, as essentially educators, but in this case to a whole nation. President and national leaders have got to use their offices, what Teddy Roosevelt once called a bully pulpit. Just a real good place from which to educate lots of people. So that was part of our intention in that. And then the ground level for me, and I'll close with this, is a project that's my day job, developing a carbon neutral town in the upper part of the Midwest, which is part of the U.S. Rust Belt. Harry Larson is one of my favorite cartoonists. In fact, there are lots of things gaining on us. For those of you in the back, this simply says objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. That's down here. And what is coming at us are on our radar screen are two big things. One, the headlines, at least in the States, have been about the economic turndown. And it turns out we're not nearly as rich as we once thought we were. It may also turn out that we're wealthier than we could have known when we thought we were merely rich. But that's sort of a Wendell Berry twist on things. I'll get into that maybe a little bit later. The other deficit that we're running that is counter to the first is this 7 to 9 billion tons of carbon we dump into the atmosphere every year. Now, these two are obviously related. The first deficit, the economic crisis, is solvable. In 3 years, 5 years, 2 years, whatever the time is, we'll figure it out and we'll solve it. The second is, and I'll explain this in just a moment, it's not solvable in the same terms, and it is potentially fatal. And I'll explain my thinking about that in just a moment. The trick for world leaders everywhere is to figure out how to solve the first, the economic crisis, in a way that doesn't compound the second. You can't read that, can you? Don't you just love PowerPoint? You know, if Jesus had just had PowerPoint in the Sermon on the Mount, you know, we'd have been better for it. It's kind of like a great big eye exam. You know, cover your left eye. This is a yellow line, obviously. On the left here, in the red print, are kind of a carbon history, or our understanding of carbon. And of course, we've been carbon-sucking creatures for a long time. It was first the carbon-rich soils of the Middle East, and then carbon in forests of Europe, and then coal as and then oil and so forth. We've been at this for quite a long time. It's the story of civilization. But we didn't much think about it until Svante Arrhenius, a Swedish scientist back in 1896, he was going through kind of a tough divorce, and he deflected his agony about his personal life into doing some really, really tedious calculations that we had to routinely for years. It took him a year, he did it, and it turns out the numbers are fairly accurate, as we later know. They're pretty good numbers. But in this case, it was statistical therapy for him. He didn't care much about climate. He thought actually as a Swede that warming the planet up would be a good thing. Some of you may agree. I agree every January in Oberlin. But when he began to work on this, the carbon here, which is in the yellow, was about 290 parts per million. It's a trace element in the atmosphere, as you all know. And it starts, all this, and I'm not going to get into this, but this is sort of the history of mulling over this subject of carbon in the atmosphere. And as we get into the middle of the 20th century, there were voices beginning to say, wait a minute, this may not be a good thing. But we didn't know for sure. And then down here in 1958, David Keeling went to Mauna Loa out in the Hawaiian chain and began to measure real carbon in the atmosphere in places pretty pristine. And he came up with, of course, the Keeling curve. You all know that. And when he did this in 1958, it was about 315 parts per million. And so it was inching up from Arrhenius' time. And then we get up to the Global 2000 reports. It was about 324 parts per million. And you inch up through a whole library of studies and scientific evidence about carbon in the atmosphere and its effects. And right now we're at about 387 parts per million CO2, so we've moved that up quite a bit. This is, of course, the Keeling curve. And this is the annual breathing in and out of carbon in the atmosphere. This is his starting point. So this is the record, the hard record of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And Nicole Krauss, in a wonderful little book called The History of Love, describes people in a Polish village prior to the German invasion of 1939. And she says there were rumors of unfathomable things. And because we couldn't fathom them, we didn't believe them until it was too late and we had no choice. And it describes, I think, very well in a different reference case our situation relative to carbon. These were the official warnings we got. The first was 1990. IPCC, as you all know, stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the official global body that studies carbon and climate and atmosphere. And we got now 4 reports. They basically say about the same thing, that we're now changing the atmosphere, the atmospheric chemistry, and hence climate on the planet at an alarming rate. And the reports get finer and finer in detail and resolution and urgency. But we've been warned.